Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So it's been a couple of weeks since we saw the launch of update 1.52 to the game. This included a bunch of new content including cars, events, engine swaps and more. And I think overall the initial thoughts about this update is that it was going to be absolutely minuscule at the beginning. However, it did prove to be a much more worthy update than I originally gave it credit for. So whilst the update itself didn't really do anything fresh in terms of, anything special or brand new to the game that we've not necessarily seen before, I do think overall it was a better update than expected, and I do think it was overall one of the better, more typical updates, especially on the back of a fairly large update prior to this one. So of course, with a decent amount of time now passed and I've deep dived into everything I can with this update, I'm going to bring you my final thoughts on Gran Turismo 7's update 1.52. Whilst we did see some decent quality of life changes, I'm only going to really talk about the main content parts of the update, so let's begin with the cars themselves. We're of course going to start off with the poster child of the update. Of course, I'm talking about the brand new R35 GTR, the T-Spec from 2024, and overall this might just be the best of the bunch when it comes to the R35 generation of GTRs. Certainly it's the best looking with some incredible special colour options. Now in terms of the price, this is actually the most expensive of the road going Nissan GTRs, so just be aware that the 2024 T-Spec will set you back more than the GTR Nismo that we also see in game. In terms of its customization, it featured a bunch of different kit options, whether that was front bumpers, side skirts, rear bumpers, wings, even some drag options on this as well, which possibly could hint to some future updates to the game. Who really knows, but hopefully it does. And in terms of the car itself, there is plenty to do to really make it feel your own. I think Polyphony did a decent job in this sense, and in terms of the car itself, stock, it's a fairly beefy car at this point in time. Don't get me wrong, it's still incredibly fast, and the GTR is known for its acceleration whilst being an absolute supercar killer, and it still definitely does that, but I would say that these days this car is really showing those extra pounds. However, the main part of this vehicle has to be when you start slapping the upgrades on. This car follows in the trend of pretty much every GTR badged car in Gran Turismo 7 in the fact that it's an absolute missile that will shoot you out of corners like there is no tomorrow. Whilst to a lot of people they will probably say, well, it's just another GTR in game. Honestly, I think having the most up-to-date Nissan GTR in a Gran Turismo game is vital for it. There's nothing more that really goes hand in hand than GTR badged GTR or Skyline, and of course the Gran Turismo series itself. So for me, this was an absolute must, and I'm glad it's in game. It does also continue the trend that we are starting to see some of the more newer models creep their way in post-launch. This is something that of course started off with the very first post-launch update, and whilst it has definitely dipped in some months, we have now got a decent collection of newer cars actually starting to come through, and considering the development time at over 200 plus days per single car, that's definitely a positive for the game. So again, the R35 T-Spec was definitely a must for the game, and it's fantastic to see it. Another car that did kind of catch me by surprise was the addition of the Lancer Evo 8, of course released fairly soon after the Lancer Evo 9 at the beginning of the year. So in terms of the Evo 8 itself, it might not be the most different from all of the other Evos in game, however it does build up those Evo generations rather quite nicely, and considering this one will only cost you 80,000 credits, you've got an absolute bargain of a vehicle here that can do it all from stock to dirt to track. Absolutely everything can be done to the Lancer Evo 8. It's a legend for a reason. So overall, with multiple different ways to buy the car in terms of the used car, brand central, a ton of customization options and multiple ways to use it, this is a very versatile car that can definitely do it all. And a lot of respect goes to the Evo 8 for just being one of those cars that is a single vehicle that can do multiple things. I think a lot of people get a lot of time out of the Evo 8, and whilst I don't think it's the most surprising car considering the pretty recent launch of that Evo 9, like I mentioned, it's still an absolute fantastic time. I do think in the stock form it's probably not the best of the bunch. It does tend to have those wobbly physics that have been caused since 1.49, so it's definitely a tuner's dream though. So you will probably need to put those upgrades on, but boy, when you do, you have a car that is so planted, so grippy, and handles so amazing that honestly you'll just forget how pretty terrible it is in its standard form. This is definitely probably my personal favorite from the entire update, and again, as mentioned, whilst to an untrained eye it's very similar to the Evo 9, I definitely think the Evo 8 might just top that for me. I just think overall it does continue the trend of all of the Evos being fairly fantastic tuner cars in Gran Turismo 7, so I'm absolutely happy to report that. Moving on to the final car then, this is of course going to be the Toyota Hiace DX, or the van. Yes, this was a very divisive vehicle. Some people hate it, some people love it. I am in the category of players that absolutely love this thing. I think it's ridiculous, and I am so happy to see that it got a day one engine swap. It's dirt cheap as well, costing you 25,000 credits. It's not going to break the bank, and whether you upgrade it with the ton of customization options available in a standard form or an engine swap form, you're probably going to have a blast with this one. It certainly continues the trend of meme cars within the Gran Turismo series. I definitely feel this will be one for the ages. In terms of the car itself, like I mentioned, if you want to go for the engine swap build, it's ridiculous. 1200 brake horsepower in a van is some serious fun to be had. However, when it comes to its standard form, it's a van. You can't really expect much. It's pretty boring, and I'm not going to lie, pretty terrible. However, like I mentioned, with the versatile customization options and the different upgrades and different ways you can really build this car in game, there is a ton of fun to be had with it. I do recommend putting some upgrades on and just kind of building it to whatever you can imagine, whether you want a rally van or a track van, drift van, engine swap van, whatever, just do it and you'll probably have yourself a whale of a time. So whilst this car was definitely not on the top of anybody's wish list, it certainly is a ton of fun. And for me, it just takes me back to the days of Gran Turismo 2, Gran Turismo 4, 5, 6, etc., where there was just a bunch of different random vehicles that you wouldn't even dream of throwing around a track. And I feel like cars like, or vehicles, vans, whatever you want to say, like the Hiace, really do kind of bring back those days and those memories of the ridiculous side of Gran Turismo. And it's great to see these kind of vehicles starting to appear within Gran Turismo 7, when at first it had a fairly uninspired and pretty bland list. It's definitely getting some nice random daily drivers in there with the likes of the Hiace and of course the Toyota Alphard. So with this vehicle being, I guess, so divisive amongst the community, I do think your mileage is going to vary depending on the type of player you are. If you're the kind of person that's a more competitive player and you want to just jump in sport mode, you'll probably absolutely hate this thing and probably never ever buy it. But if you're an OG player like me and you just appreciate that ridiculous side of Gran Turismo, that honestly, I think you'll get plenty of miles out of this thing. You can just tell from the footage how stupidly fun this thing is to throw around almost any track in the game. You'll probably surprise yourself just how good that engine swap variant is once you get the balance right. So with that being done, let's move in to the events next. This is definitely going to be probably one of the, I guess, points where I'm a little bit on the fence with in terms of update 1.52. We got 5 brand new events to the game. We got the Nissan GTR Cup at St. Croix. Now this followed the typical formula of the rest of the GTR Cup. There's nothing really new here apart from a new GTR variant, and it was a decent enough time, but overall a fairly short event. Now, if there's one thing that really does bug me when it comes to the GTR Cup, is that there are a ton of GTRs in game, a bunch of different generations and special models. However, Polyphony just continues to use this 10-minute event format for these events, and it really just doesn't seem like enough. If you've got so many types of a certain specific vehicle with the GTR badge on, then why not just make the events longer and just pull off some mini endurance events? I feel like that would add to it. Moving on, next we have the Sunday Cup. Of course, this is the first post-launch Sunday Cup event that we've actually seen to GT7 2.5 years later. I do appreciate the fact that it is showing off some more of the daily drivers in Gran Turismo. I think they're a staple of the series, so seeing more of them is always a good thing. I do appreciate the fact that Polyphony themselves went ahead and put a delivery van sticker on the brand new Toyota Hiace, just kind of jumping on the bandwagon of, you know, taking the mix. So I do appreciate that one. And whilst I don't absolutely love the event, it was nice, like I mentioned, to see some of these slower cars in Gran Turismo 7 finally getting some long-awaited love. I feel like early on in the menu books, once you'd done and dusted with a couple of them, that was it. You never really saw those daily drivers again. So to have them back and taking centre stage, at least for one more event, was pretty decent. Then we had 3 of the Evolution meeting events. Now the first one, this was at Kyoto Driving Park. The second was at Monza. So we got 2 tarmac versions of the Evolution meeting. Both of those were fairly great. I think definitely one is stronger than the other. And of course, finally we actually got to take the Evos on the dirt at Colorado Springs. And I really did enjoy that event. And it was great to see them kind of paying homage to that rally heritage. So in terms of the 2 tarmac events, I do feel like Kyoto Driving Park is the better of the 2. I really do find the more longer layout of it much more difficult. I think there's a nice selection of mid-speed, high-speed and, you know, very low-speed corners. I think the AI were pretty much tuned perfectly in terms of the event itself. However, Monza was pretty much the opposite. It was far too easy, and it's a massive shame as I love throwing these Evos around Monza, but it was honestly too easy. No matter what, it just seems like the Evos are just not tuned very well here, and the balance is the complete opposite of what we saw at Kyoto Driving Park. So for me, that is the weaker of the 2, and it is a massive shame. Overall though, I do think the best of the 3 has to be the one at Colorado Springs. I really did enjoy this. Honestly, the Evos are fantastic on dirt. You have to tune them a different way, and I just think it gives an entirely different vibe to these cars. Seeing them all throwing themselves around the jumps, doing some high-speed dirt overtaking, drifting around, it was just fantastic. I really did enjoy this event, and it may just be my favourite of the entire update. So definitely worth a shot at that one. We also got a brand new extra menu. Of course, this one was aimed at Audi, so you had to collect the Quattro Pikes Peak, the TT Coupe, the 2003 model, and of course the Audi R18 TDI. Now, in terms of the special events or the extra menus, whatever you want to call them, they're okay. It just gives you a nice rundown of the history. But I think in terms of this one, maybe it was just me, they didn't really say too much. They sort of skipped over a bunch of the history with Audi, quickly jumped to the whole four-wheel drive Quattro in the 80s, and then kind of just went into the more modern stuff. They really didn't stick to the initial history of Audi very much, which I do think is a shame. There's actually quite a bit of history to Audi themselves, so to see them kind of just glimpse over that almost instantly and move into the 1980s onwards definitely just felt a little bit sour. So in terms of this, I do genuinely appreciate the history of manufacturers. However, this one just felt a little bit kind of just shoehorned in there as, okay, we need to make an extra menu. In terms of the reward itself, it was a 6-star, which is the best one you can get alongside the engine swap tickets. So I do appreciate this. I just didn't like the fact that I got the Daihatsu Copen VGT as a reward. So that was kind of a low point. But overall, the events themselves were better than expected. And now for the highlight of the update, of course, the engine swaps. These are definitely the best thing about this update. There is no denying that. It was a massive selection of different JDM swaps and honestly some ridiculous swaps I didn't expect. We also saw the inclusion of certain cars having more than one engine swap, which I think is fantastic for the game. That was great to see some of these models now going into their second phases of engine swaps and still retaining the original one. So in terms of the swaps themselves, there was many highlights. I do like the fact that we can now put the Demon Challenger engine alongside the Escudo engine swap in the Mitsubishi GTO. I think this is a great swappable car, and just having an extra one there is fantastic. I also really like putting the Evo Group B engine in the road going version of the Evo, as well as now having the option to put the SR20 in the Nissan Silvia Qs from 1988. However, my personal standout of the bunch has to be the 787B in the Roadster touring car. That one caught me by surprise, and it's absolutely hilarious, if a little bit on the more expensive side. So it's time to give you my final thoughts on what I think of update 1.52. Do I think that this update really did anything that special or different from all of the other relatively minor updates? Honestly, no. But do I think in terms of the content, it actually seemed more thought about and overall betterly themed than a lot of the other previous updates? Absolutely. This was very much a JDM themed update, of course, with the latest GTR, the Evo 8, and a Japanese van to throw around, as well as 10 incredible JDM themed engine swaps, and of course the 5 events aimed at the new vehicles. In terms of that, I do think it was a much more, I guess, thought out update than some of the times where we see a bunch of random all sorts and everything just crammed into one. However, do I think it's going to necessarily boost up the longevity of GT7? Probably not. I still think, okay, update 1.49 was pretty massive, but it's been a decent few months since then, and a lot of those players will probably be wanting the next big update to bring them back. So hopefully with the PS5 Pro releasing, they do go ahead and just smash out a pretty big update to celebrate that, as well as of course the My First Gran Turismo, which will be coming over the holiday period. However, in terms of the 1.52, I do think it's a decent enough time, but it's definitely going to be down to your personal taste. Anyway, that's it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, guys. Peace.